It's been well over a month since the United We Roll protest rolled into Ottawa and protested on Parliament Hill for a couple of days. Since that time, Liberal and NDP politicians and left-wing journalists have had revisionist history, repeatedly referring back to the protest in order to smear Conservatives and both the People's Party of Canada and the Conservative Party of Canada as being full of white nationalists and racists, because supposedly from these armchair journalists and politicians, according to them, the hundreds of protesters that showed up are all lumped in as racists and white nationalists. But I was there for True North. I traveled to Ottawa to cover the first day of the protest, and I spent 4 hours out there in the frigid cold. I think it was minus 10 or lower that day. The many people that I spoke to were actually just everyday blue-collar folk, either out of work or underemployed, or there were others that were just out there in solidarity of friends and family that have been out of work, whether it be manufacturing, the trucking industry, or the oil industry, or other blue-collar jobs like that seem to be industries that have hit hard times.
Hi, I'm Graeme here for True North, covering the United We Roll Convoy for Canada protest outside of Parliament Hill here. As you can see, there's convoy from Alberta out here that's blocked the road outside of Parliament. The protest has finished up. It was overall fairly peaceful. Antifa did show up, but the police did a good job of keeping everything under control. The media has portrayed this as a racist or bigoted movement for the most part, but this convoy was actually separate from the Yellow Vest protesters. Although there were a lot of Yellow Vest protesters here, the ones that I spoke to, they seemed like reasonable people, not racist or bigoted, just people concerned about their livelihoods, the direction that the country's taking right now, and voicing their concerns to the government about wanting pipelines built, the border to be protected and not allowing illegal immigration to happen, and just common sense things like that.
The convoy started in Alberta, and for the most part it was a group of truckers who decided to cross the country on the Trans-Canada Highway to come to Ottawa and show their displeasure with the Trudeau government's direction that they're taking the country economically, running massive deficits, and to their mind not looking out for the interests of Alberta and the oil industry, while also imposing a carbon tax that will inevitably raise the cost of living for almost everything.
What are your thoughts then on Trudeau and the pipelines?
He's got to go. That guy is a disaster. Every day we wake up to another disaster. We need pipelines to import dirty Saudi oil over our oil, and for a good majority of the public to say that our oil is no good. You know, it's the blood of a country. It is. So we've got to get our resources out of the ground. We've got to get Alberta going. They used to be the have province. Now they're the have not province. We've got to really zero on a province like Quebec that takes most of the money, and yet they don't support the rest of Canada. Those are the ones that we've got to go after.
Do you believe if the oil was in Quebec, it'd be a different story?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's the most corrupt province in the Dominion of Canada. I'm not a big fan of anything Quebec. One of the big things we face in Ontario is the truckers and all the workers come into Ontario. It's not reciprocal the other way. I've stood up against it, and I'll continue to speak very loudly and clearly about the province of Quebec.
The way that a lot of the press and Liberal and NDP politicians have decided to smear the United We Roll Convoy and the two Conservative parties is that because both Maxime Bernier and Andrew Scheer went out and spoke to the protesters. They were somehow condoning a bunch of racists and white supremacists. And the way they came to this conclusion, these armchair commentators that didn't even, for the most part, show up to this rally, they maybe saw a couple of pictures from some left-wing journalists that were there for a brief spell, is that far-right, controversial and incendiary commentator Faith Goldie was at the protest down by the road where all of the trucks had blocked off the street in front of Parliament. But she was never on the stage in the main protest that was on the grounds of Parliament Hill where the two Conservative leaders spoke. But this didn't stop dishonest journalists and politicians from claiming that Scheer and Bernier shared a stage with Faith Goldie, which never occurred.
The one tweet the Conservative leader won't change is the one of him attending the same rally as white supremacist Faith Goldie. It's quite interesting when he chooses to make changes, but when he doesn't.
To be clear, I've had nothing to do with the organization, did not rally any people to come here besides maybe saying that, I would be here at some point. I'm not part of the program whatsoever.
Anyway, the United We Roll Convoy was actually covered pretty accurately and fairly when they were first traveling to Ottawa by news outlets like the CBC and the National Post. But then more left-wing media and organizations and journalists and politicians applied pressure on social media, and the highly political Canadian Anti-Hate Network put out a press release to all the newsrooms throughout Canada, citing some right-wing extremists that they had found involved in the Yellow Vest movement or Facebook page. But it's important to note that the Yellow Vest official Facebook page in Canada has over 100,000 members in it. So yes, there are some people with more extremist views sharing things in that group, and some of them are overtly racist. And some of these individuals even showed up at some of the stopovers that the United We Roll Convoy stopped at these public events. But by and large, if you look at the comments and these people's concerns, it appears to be mostly just everyday blue-collar workers that are fed up with a government that seems to not be looking out for their interests and are concerned about the out-of-control spending that the Trudeau government has been engaged in the last 3 years.
So as you can see, it's been a fairly peaceful event. People just concerned about the direction that our government's taking right now, the inability to build pipelines, the carbon tax, and the border that's currently wide open for people who want to illegally cross. For True North, this is Graeme Gordon. You can check out all of our work on tnc.news, and if you want to support our work, you'll find links there as well.